Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for joining us today. Our topic is human trafficking, which the United States government recently declared a public health crisis. My guest is Ashleigh Chapman, who's been fighting human trafficking for over 20 years. In 2022, she was named one of USA Today's Women of the Year. She is an attorney, a graduate of Regent School of Law in 2013, and she and one of her Regent Law School fellow students, founded the global nonprofit Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice to build solutions that have helped thousands of advocates and communities across the globe. Ashleigh, thank you so much for being here. It is an absolute pleasure. The work you're doing is just incredible. Thank you. But before we actually get into the nitty-gritty, a lot of people think human trafficking and really don't know what that is. And I'm wondering, is this a fancy way of saying slavery? Is it modern-day slavery?
A lot of people use those terms synonymously. So human trafficking is, in layman's terms, the sale of human beings, the commercial sale of human beings for forced labor, for sexual exploitation, and for organs around the globe. So we're looking at the business, if you will, the global, illegal, and horrific business of selling human beings for millions of people to exploit and billions of dollars in revenue from that business model. So $150 billion per year industry impacting over 50 million souls worldwide.
50 million souls worldwide. And in the United States alone, how many people are trafficked?
So those numbers just came out this last fall. They were updated we have now crested over 1 million victims of human trafficking here in the United States. I've not been to any community, and we've worked on operations in all 50 states where trafficking is not happening. So communities of 50. Communities of many, many, many more than that. So we have now surpassed 1 million victims, and victims that would include adults and children. That would include foreign nationals and citizens. It really knows no demographic and no geographic boundaries either.
And one of the many things that you're trying to do is raise awareness to everyday average people about how to spot people who are being trafficked and then alert the authorities. And you're talking specifically and trying to educate healthcare workers because people who are being human trafficked show up in healthcare facilities, hospitals, doctors' offices all the time and get treated for their injuries or whatever, and then they go back to the trafficker.
Yeah, the nexus between human trafficking and healthcare cannot be overstated. So the studies continue to show that 88 to 90% of victims of trafficking, while they're being exploited, are presenting themselves to local healthcare settings across the United States, some as many as 15 to 18 times before that healthcare provider rightly identifies the situation. So they're treating the broken bone, they're treating the chemical burn, they're treating the sexual assault even, but they're not seeing that this situation is trafficking. And things that that make that very difficult, first of all, is healthcare providers have not been trained to recognize and respond to this, but also trafficking victims often don't know that word. So they wouldn't know how to self-identify as trafficking. They know what they're experiencing, but they wouldn't know how to self-identify or ask for help from that, and they'd be too terrified to try. So yeah, I often say if I had one profession to train in every community there is across the U.S., it's going to be healthcare providers, because no one else is seeing victims at this rate of prevalence.
So real quickly, what should healthcare providers be on the lookout for? I mean, so in other words, in case there are healthcare workers who are watching who may have not gotten this training, what are some of the highlights?
Some of the main things are, if this person seems to be being controlled by someone else in the room, that should be a massive red flag. And what I mean by control is maybe that person keeps speaking for that individual you're treating. They're not, or maybe the individual you're treating keeps deferring to that person to speak for them. If they seem to be, you know, markers that you might sense in a domestic violence case, you know, that might be present. Certainly, if you're seeing bruising or scarring or any number of injuries that a person's not wanting to kind of be forthcoming about what might be happening there. if they lack their own access to their finances or their identification papers, and that's not just for non-citizens. So we've worked with citizens of the United States who've been trafficked, and those papers and those identification documents get taken from them. It's a way to control movement. So you're looking for control, and then there are over 10 concurrent and common healthcare conditions that victims are experiencing of labor and sex trafficking. And if a doctor can get trained and a frontline HCP gets trained on those indicators, now we start to see the bigger story of what this person might be going through, as opposed to just the symptom that's presenting today.
And when people recognize or suspect that someone might be trafficked, did you just call the police? Or is there someone else you should call?
Yeah, so the challenge, yes, the answer is yes, but the challenge here still in the United States is that a lot of police have not yet been trained either on trafficking, and this is something we're trying to solve for and work with states on. But you do need to call the police. You need to call the law enforcement. What I always encourage folks to do is, firstly, try to build that bridge first. So if you're in healthcare, for sure, you need to know who the Human Trafficking Task Force law enforcement lead is in your community. That might be coming out from your Attorney General's office. It could be coming out from your state's Bureau of Investigation. But go ahead and know that, and maybe even go ahead and build a bridge, between your organization and law enforcement who are specifically tasked with that. If you don't know who that is, or you don't sense that you have someone in your community who is spearheading trafficking operations, then call 911 and say, I need to speak to someone who has received training on trafficking. Yeah. Because there's a lot involved from an investigative standpoint that someone who's been trained in trafficking will also hear the red flags you're seeing through the lens that you see it through, and will hopefully also have received some trauma-informed investigative care practices there too, so they can deal rightly with victims and get them the help they need.
You were talking about one of the red flags is there's the person controlling the other person, always at their side. And I travel a lot, and when I'm in the bathroom at an airport, especially the big city airports, there's always that sign on the inside of the bathroom stall that says, if you're being trafficked, and it's in a lot of different languages, call this number, or look for the person in the airport that has on the yellow vest or whatever. And I'm like, what is that all about? And I think, oh, wait, yeah, this is the only time that they are alone, where the trafficker is not with them, that they can get information about how to get help. Yeah. And it just gives you an idea of how overprotected they are. I mean, I even hesitate to say this right now because I don't want any traffickers who are listening to know that there is that's there, because they can't come into the ladies' room with them. Right.
Yeah, it's a good touch point. And anything that we can do to get information into the hands of those who are most at risk of trafficking in our communities is going to be so impactful, because one of the things that traffickers are exploiting, they're certainly exploiting vulnerable people. And usually people with compounding vulnerabilities. So that's key to understand, and we can unpack that further. But the other thing they're exploiting is that individual's complete lack of understanding that, one, they have rights, and that there are resources and people who would be available to help. So when we can proactively, in that scenario, present information and get it into the hands of people who might need to see it and can see it outside the realm of that control, it's a powerful way to help them know that they can ask for help and people will care and will respond.
Right, and it just is such a wake-up call to those of us who are not recognizing that there are these people living among us and walking among us, and we would never know, and we really need to open up our eyes and help them. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Ashleigh Chapman and talk more about human trafficking, how to combat it, and the different types of trafficking, which you just barely touched on, and other ways that we can help and things that you're doing to help these people. So we're going to take a quick break and be right back with more Healthy Living right after this. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We are continuing our discussion with Ashleigh Chapman, who has been combating human trafficking for over 20 years. Let's talk about the different types of trafficking. You talked about how lucrative it is. When we think about drug dealers, they'll sell a drug and it's gone. Or people who sell guns illegally, they sell the gun and it's gone. But if you're selling a person for sex, they can make money off of that person 10, 20 times a night, night after night, year after year. So you can see how lucrative that would be.
It is, and the way that I try to help people understand, Traffickers, this is a high profit, low risk business model, and that has to change, right? I mean, so traffickers are business people in the worst sense of the word, right? But they are also cowards, because they're preying on the most vulnerable in our communities: children who've aged out of foster care, who have no one, runaway and homeless individuals on our streets, certainly recent migrants and refugees who land someplace with nothing and no one, and that's a very easy person to exploit. So when women coming out of domestic violence shelters are a target by traffickers here in the United States. So they're trying to prey on this individual who has no one, which is why it's so important, I think, from a prevention standpoint, for communities to realize who really is most at risk in your city, because that will change how we need to approach this issue. If we have a picture only in our mind from movies we see or social media posts that we see, we're not going to see that child who's being perhaps trafficked by their family to feed that family's drug addiction, but is still showing up at school the next day and at church on Sunday and their sports clubs on Saturdays, but their nighttime is a living nightmare. And so so we have to understand who's most at risk in our city. How do we wrap around individuals who are most at risk, making sure this is never their story, but then who all is in a position to recognize and respond to trafficking, and how do we get them trained to see this? I think when that starts to happen, we will significantly see that business model, if you will, decimated. Because yes, right now, I am more likely to get caught if I sell a drug or weapon, way more likely to get caught and way more likely to get prosecuted for that than selling a human being. Oh. And that has to change.
And then it's not just the sex, where they have basically, selling these people many times a night, but you were saying that there are some people who are sort of like what we traditionally think about with slavery. They sell the person and they work in the fields, right?
Or in your restaurants, or in your nail salons, or in any number of businesses in your community where they're being forced through force. So the legal terms are force, fraud, and coercion. So by force, fraud, or coercion, this individual is being told you must work, and they're not being paid for that, or they're being paid very little, and they're being forced to stay in that scenario. So, and that impacts citizens as well as non-citizens. My husband and I, on vacation, walked into a diner a couple years ago and walked out rescuing a labor trafficking victim who is an adult white female citizen of the United States with family 2 hours away, and she couldn't get out of the hands of these traffickers.
So how do they keep them in bondage? For example, during the day, a lot of these people do speak English. Maybe they even were born and raised here in the United States. Why can't they get away?
A lot of folks tend to think that human trafficking here in the United States is being driven by from those people over there coming over here, when the reality is the number one trafficked population here in the United States are children who are in and have run away from, or who have aged out of foster care.
Foster care.
Yeah. Oh. So what happens in their life, what they know, is that I was abused to the point in my own family unit that I was taken out of that family unit, placed into a broken foster care system. I spun around in some states as many as 14 different homes. And I finally had enough and I ran away. And then I met this person on the street who said that they will care for me, that they will love me, that they will feed me. And now they're forcing me to do things I don't want to do, but I can't get out because I fear for my life. And also, this is the only person who's ever been consistent in my life. And so traffickers are preying on this vulnerability. The whole idea of most trafficking victims being kidnapped into trafficking is not true. Most traffickers are building relationships and making promises of trust that then they learn all they can about this individual to manipulate that later into a scenario where either they've threatened their family, they've threatened their lives. We see a lot here in the United States where even if at some point in that process that person says, no, I don't want to do what you're asking me to do, then they will be violently assaulted to the point where they submit. And by this time, this person's so isolated from any safe people or safe community, they don't have anyone to ask for help.
So they're not necessarily locked up during the day.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, that's another myth. Are there individuals who are locked up in trafficking? I think that is absolutely true. But the overwhelming majority have what we would call invisible chains going on in their life. So So they're either protecting someone who's being threatened by their traffickers. They feel so alone and and completely invisible to the world, that they don't believe there's any other way, you know, any other existence that they could seek. They don't know that there are resources or people who can help. And so this trafficker, you know, is kind of isolating them that way.
Wow, that's absolutely horrific, but we're so blind to it. It's right underneath our noses that are people living every single day, and people we encounter without a doubt who are being trafficked, and we would never know. We need to wake up and help them. We're going to take another quick break and be right back with Ashleigh Chapman. We're talking about human trafficking. On the other side of the break, we're going to talk about ways to help these victims, so stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're talking about human trafficking with Ashleigh Chapman. And you were talking before the break about how to recognize people who are being trafficked. And once you see and suspect that someone is, how do you get them out of that? Do they want out? It seems like there's a bit of Stockholm syndrome going on here. Do they sometimes, if you pull them out, do they go back to these abusers?
I think Stockholm syndrome is absolutely in play in some scenarios. I think most of the time, yes, people want out of these horrific situations. They're being used as commodities in the worst possible way, whether that's for sexual exploitation, for forced labor, and globally, certainly for organ removal. This is the worst of humanity. So do they want out? They want out. But the reality is that many folks have come through such hardships in their life and then landed in the hands of an exploiter at this level that they don't see a way out. And even when we are in the world able to help that person either through a rescue operation, remove them, or help them exit. And by the way, only 1% of victims while they're being exploited are currently being rescued from that scenario. So this is why it's critical to get trained on this. But even then, we have not yet built pathways to success on the other side of that in our communities. So where is a mom with 2 children who's been trafficked in your city? Where is she going for support now on the other side of this? Where is that foreign national, maybe labor trafficking individual who now is on a path to citizenship here? Where is he going to receive the support and care that he needs? If we haven't created that path for both education, safe community, and living wage jobs, what will happen is that person does not necessarily go back to their exploiter, but they end up in vulnerable places again that new people can re-exploit them, or that old trafficker can come back into their life. And
because
so
that's all they know.
That's yeah, and they have no recourse, right? So it's almost a lie, really, to take someone from that kind of situation and then say, good luck to you, figure it out. So as citizens, just concerned citizens in our communities, you know, the 2 things we can do is, 1, make sure we know the signs to look for and make that call. Do not hesitate to make the call when you're concerned. And the second thing is to figure out, how do you support that pathway to success for people who've already experienced trafficking or those who are most at risk? How do we make sure they have safe community and safety nets? That alone is an insulating factor against someone who would abuse them again.
And so talk about some of the ways that things that are, some programs that are available to help people get on the path back into being a normal citizen. Yeah,
some businesses and communities across the United States are really taking this on in relationship with many local nonprofits and even faith-based providers. So while the faith-based community and the nonprofit community are wrapping this person in immediate care, right, and resources, maybe even residential housing for a while till they get through that trauma and get healed, businesses are creating apprenticeships and job pathways for these individuals to pursue. Local colleges are creating scholarship programs for them to go after and pursue their education. It's really beautiful when you see many people coming around this issue like that. As a citizen, what you might want to do is go online and figure out who in your community is providing restorative care for victims of trafficking and survivors. There are so many needs there. And those needs are present from the moment that law enforcement official is interceding on their behalf. So gift cards to get clothing and meals and hotel rooms, as well as all the tangibles one might need to kind of get their life back together. There are so many ways to come alongside this fight. To join the fight against human trafficking doesn't require you to be a law enforcement officer or healthcare provider or an attorney. We need everyone focused on this at their local community level.
Great, great. All right, we're going to take one more final break and be right back with Ashleigh Chapman. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about human trafficking with Ashleigh Chapman. You mentioned selling people for sex and also for forced labor. And then you said something about organ trafficking. What is that?
Well, it's as horrible as it sounds. But this is being driven by the lack of organs available for transplants around the globe. And so we call this organ tourism, and it is now illegal here in the United States as well as other nations too, because what was happening is, and is still happening to this day, black market, is when people couldn't get a kidney or some sort of organ that they were needing, they would go abroad and purchase that off market and have that kidney transplant or that lung transplant or whatever it might be. What they were not thinking through somehow, I don't know how, was where is that coming from? And so through force, again, through fraud, through coercion, individuals around the globe are being forced to go through those surgeries for organ removal. In some instances, that might mean killing that person. In other instances, that might mean promising them monies that never come through to help support their family that might be starving. And so it is another business model for traffickers to use to exploit, and it is heinous, and it is illegal.
One of the most horrific things I've ever heard. Kidneys, honestly, not that big of a deal. I mean, people have 2 kidneys and it's okay to, but what are some of the other organs?
Everything you can think of.
And so that really would be fatal.
It would be.
And we've only scratched the surface here, unfortunately. Where can our viewers find out more about this issue and you in particular? Yeah,
so if you'll go, we have a number of websites with so much information for you. So if you're interested about the issue of trafficking and just wanting to learn more about that, I would encourage you to go to afrj.com. That's the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice, so afrj.com. And you'll land with a lot of information there. If you're trying to figure out resources for your local community, we have all that at engagetogether.com. And if you're wanting to go take an online course to learn all you can about how to see this in your own community and how to respond, that's Justice U, our online university for justice advocates, and that's at learnwithjusticeu.com.
Well, Ashleigh, thank you so much for the incredible work you're doing and for being here on Healthy Living today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to you for joining us for this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Laurie Johnson. We'll see you again next week.